Alright guys, so we have officially started getting some of the images and footage in the aftermath of Israel's 2-week-long raid on Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza. So I'm going to show you guys this CNN article breaking it down and a bunch of other things that I want to show y'all. But before we get into this article, I just want to say a couple things about Al-Shifa. First off, this was the largest hospital complex inside of Gaza. Okay, now it was only semi-functional because of previous Israeli attacks and because of the limited supplies that they're working with and how overburdened they are with, injured men, women, and children and all of that, as well as the people who are taking refuge at Al-Shifa. Thousands of people who are trying to use this as some sort of a safe place as the rest of Gaza is being bombed into oblivion. But it was the largest hospital system or hospital network or complex or whatever inside of Gaza. And it's also in the northern portion of Gaza where the humanitarian situation, the man-made crisis, has been that much worse. And so destroying this in the way that they did is condemning who knows how many thousands of people to die because they don't even have access to the pretense of adequate medical care, and how many more thousands who are using it as a place of refuge that have absolutely nowhere to go. I mean, just absolute, calamity for so many different reasons. So let's go ahead and get into the CNN article breaking it down. They say, Israeli troops end Al-Shifa hospital raid, leaving behind bodies and trail of destruction. They say Israel's military has withdrawn from Gaza's largest hospital, Al-Shifa, after a 14-day siege that witnesses and Palestinian officials say has left buildings largely destroyed and bodies strewn across the complex. The IDF confirmed its withdrawal on Monday, saying its troops had killed Hamas militants and seized weaponry and intelligence documents, saying the terrorist base in Shifa has been eliminated, according to the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, and he praised the IDF's determined and professional action. Determined and professional action. Keep that in your mind as we read more. Medical crews are working to recover hundreds of bodies scattered across the grounds at Al-Shifa, with at least 300 bodies found so far, according to Gaza's civil defense. Determining the precise number of people killed is difficult, it added, because the Israeli troops had buried bodies inside and around the complex and bulldozed nearby roads. So they're killing people and then just kind of throwing them in the dirt and burying them. And then also bulldozing the surrounding infrastructure, the roads, so that other ambulances couldn't even get to the location either. And it's also difficult to determine exactly how many people are killed because Israel will not allow journalists to cover this. They will not allow foreign journalists to go on the ground to cover what's actually happening here. And so we're left to rely, obviously, on the sources on the ground, the people who are going through this directly, as well as the Gaza Ministry of Health and their civil defense and all of that, as well as, journalists who work for Al Jazeera, for example, or local Palestinians, or whatever the case may be. We're forced to rely on those numbers. But that's simply because Israel will not allow foreign journalists to go in. And even if they did go in, you'd be putting a target on your back for given how many journalists Israel has explicitly targeted for exposing some of their crimes. But I mean, we're talking about hundreds of people who have been killed in this. They say Raed al-Dashan, the director of operations at Gaza's civil defense, told CNN, quote, "It's almost impossible for ambulances to reach the hospital due to the damaged roads in the city." An IDF spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, said that 900 suspected militants had been detained during its 2-week operation. More than 500 of these had been identified as members of Hamas or the PIJ, he said on Monday, adding that some of those detained are commanders and significant people. I mean, guys, listen, the notion that they arrested 900 militants and 500 of them have been identified as Hamas and the PIJ inside of the Al-Shifa complex is ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous at face value. Okay? We've seen the IDF go and do these mass arrests of people where they just look at anybody who's over the age of, 12, and especially if you're a man, and they'll round them up, strip them down, put them in the backs of trucks, take them off to who knows, where, in many instances torture them, in many instances even kill some of them, and then the rest get, temporarily released back into Gaza to walk through the rubble and try to find their way. We've seen previous examples of that where a vast majority of the people who they have arrested are just random civilians. So are we really supposed to trust this number, 500, at face value? I mean, you guys have already raided Al-Shifa, by the way. Is there something unique to Al-Shifa Hospital that Hamas would have to rely on Al-Shifa Hospital to have 500 to 1,000 Hamas militants in the hospital? What are we talking about here, guys? I mean, it's just, it is mind-numbing that anybody would believe that number. 900 arrests. I mean, Jesus Christ. They say CNN is unable to verify these numbers of bodies inside Al-Shifa independently because of the lack of reporting access to Gaza, like I was saying. And they say Gaza's Ministry of Health said that about 3,000 people were inside the hospital when the IDF began this raid 2 weeks ago. It's second on the facility in nearly 6 months of war. This is a before and after of what this raid looked like. Now, keep in mind that the IDF is saying they're so proud of their soldiers for keeping this professional, okay? That this was a targeted raid against Hamas, and that, you know, and we'll get to this here in a second, but they're even claiming that 0 civilians were killed as a part of this operation. This is the before, and this is the after. I mean, seriously, take a second to look at that. This is the before, and this is the after. Does this look like a targeted operation against Hamas? Does this look like a military that is desperately trying to avert killing civilians? I mean, there's nothing to say about it, guys. The pictures and the images speak for themselves. And this is what a huge portion of Gaza looks like now. And I don't know if there was a single Hamas militant inside of this complex, inside the hospital, or in the surrounding area. It's plausible. Maybe there were a handful. Who knows, right? But the idea that, as Israel is trying to claim, that there was some sort of a massive command and control center, and that whatever Hamas presence they allege was in this region, that justifies doing this, it's laughable at face value. If you want to talk about the standards of international law, right? The arguments they constantly use are, you know, well, they're using them as human shields. Well, even in that instance, right? Israel, and this is something the UN Special Rapporteur mentioned in their report, saying it's reasonable Israel is committing genocide just a couple of days ago. They mentioned how Israel stretches this international law jargon to fit whatever their military is doing on the ground. And basically, by their definition, the entirety of the Gaza Strip is being used as a human shield by Hamas. And so therefore, anything that they target is just a human shield. It's a valid target. There's no such thing as a safe place. Hospitals aren't off limits. Schools aren't off limits. Churches or mosques or refugee camps or whatever. None of those are off limits because they're all just Hamas human shields. That's what gets you to this. They say after claiming its first operation in November had been a success, the IDF in January said that it had completely dismantled Hamas's command structure in northern Gaza, only for Hamas to reportedly return to the same site months later, sparking a renewed Israeli assault. One of these journalists, Kader al-Zaynoun, a journalist from the official Palestinian news agency, Wafa, also working for CNN, said the scene at Al-Shifa after the IDF's withdrawal was like a horror movie. He said bulldozers crushed bodies of people everywhere around and in the yard of the hospital. They say Palestinians began arriving at the destroyed complex to search for missing family members, saying, "We found entire families dead, and their bodies are decomposing in houses around the hospital." I mean, what do we even say at this point, guys? This is some more images in terms of what it looked like in the aftermath of this. This is part of the hospital here, and then you can also see the surrounding area and the level of destruction that we're talking about. A couple more before and after pictures. Here's a before, and here's what it looks like now. A couple more here. I mean, there were reports of, obviously, as you can tell from these pictures, reports of them straight up torching some of these buildings to the ground, like lighting them on fire. I believe this is the previous entrance to Al-Shifa. I mean, the walls are gone. Looks like there's bullet holes everywhere, shrapnel, char all up on the side of the building. There's nothing left, guys. They've completely destroyed the entire hospital complex and the surrounding area. And yet we still have motherfuckers like this. Naftali Bennett, former Prime Minister of Israel, and this is how he phrases it, similar to what we just read from Hagari. He says, "Amazing battlefield achievement. The IDF just completed our 2-week operation on a Hamas command center that Hamas embedded within the Shifa Medical Center." Again, where's the evidence for that? Are you going to show us another picture of like 10 guns laid out on a mat with a Hamas bandana or a flag that you just unfolded out of a IDF backpack? I mean, where's the justification that this was some sort of a sprawling 1,000-member strong command and control center with Hamas? They say Hamas used the staff and patients as human shields, of course. And I mean, again, these are the results that he's listing. All the civilians were evacuated. 200 Hamas terrorists were killed. 500 have been captured. And he says not one civilian was killed. Not one. I mean, this is how audacious they've gotten. This is how bold they feel now. That they can straight up lie to your face. To say not a single civilian, not even one. You couldn't even use the typical thing of like, well, some civilians may have died, but they got caught in the crossfire because Hamas was firing at us, and, it's unfortunate, but blah, 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 blah. They didn't even go with that. They just went with no civilians have died. Contrast that with reports like this. This is a Palestinian journalist who's been on the ground, as he points out here, for 6 months. He says what he saw in Al-Shifa is like nothing he's ever witnessed before. He says, Israeli occupation forces executed 300 Palestinians in and around the hospital, and this morning, I witnessed hundreds of bodies outside the hospital. There wasn't one full body, and all the bodies were either pieces or heavily mutilated. The bodies were in horrific conditions. Many had their hands and legs tied behind their backs and were flattened by a bulldozer, which again ties in with previous reporting that I've told you guys about, that there were allegations of straight-up field executions around the Al-Shifa medical complex. They say many of the bodies were burned and left to be crushed to pieces. Several bodies were decomposed and partly eaten by stray dogs. Most of the bodies were unrecognizable, and families could only identify them by their clothing. Al-Shifa was the largest hospital complex in Gaza, catering to many complex cases. It has been completely destroyed. They burned it down and destroyed all the medical equipment. Israeli occupation has one goal, and it's to destroy every inch of Gaza. And I don't know how you could possibly come away with any other conclusion. When you do this to a hospital and then try to play it off as some sort of a targeted operation against Hamas, does this look targeted? I mean, it's part of the same strategy that we've been seeing, which is to make life in Gaza impossible. Targeting hospitals and other civilian infrastructure is obviously a part of that. It's not just the hospitals. It's the schools. It's the, controlled demolition of university buildings. It is the attacks on ATMs even, right, to disrupt civil life. It's the attacks on, obviously churches and mosques and cultural sites. It's the attacks on water and farmland, just to make it completely uninhabitable. Here's another testimony here from a Palestinian medical relief member, Dr. Mohammed. He says, I myself witnessed victims handcuffed, blindfolded, and buried in the hospital yard. In the emergency unit, we found dozens of bodies. All of them were handcuffed and blindfolded. We also have here, from, as pointed out by Ryan Grimm from the New York Times, they said, decomposing bodies, mountains of rubble, burned buildings. One man described what he found upon returning to Al-Shifa Hospital after the IDF ended their raid. He said, as soon as you approach Al-Shifa Hospital, you are hit with the stench of decomposing bodies. He added, the whole time we were walking, we were stepping over body parts. So, I mean, again, contrast these testimonies that we're hearing with the testimony from Israeli representatives and officials. This was a former prime minister of Israel, guys. 0 civilians killed is what they're claiming. I mean, it would be laughable if it wasn't so fucking dark. So, a couple more things here before I finish off. This is a medic who, has been going to Gaza to try to help with the situation on the ground, and she gave her perspective when a journalist asked whether or not Hamas had any sort of major presence inside of Al-Shifa. So let's watch this.
Doctor, I look, the picture you paint is one of devastation. You'll know that the Israeli military say that they have killed and detained hundreds of Hamas militants within the Al-Shifa complex. Do you know if Hamas were there and were fighting with the Israelis?
I am just shocked that we're still having this conversation. They executed tens of people point blank, including one of our colleagues, Dr. Ahmed Khalalati, who's a very experienced plastic surgeon, him and his mother, who's also a physician. They executed people point blank. And including many of our colleagues who've been detained now. We haven't heard back from them. Previous students of mine detained, young doctors detained. We don't know if they're dead or alive. They have been gone for over 100 days. So to say that this is a strategic targeting of Hamas is an insult to our intellect and our humanity. This is a destruction of people who heal. This is a direct targeting of healthcare workers. I just want to paint a very brief picture of what healthcare workers are telling me there. They're saying that when they leave the hospital, civilians give them civilian clothing because wearing scrubs is sticking a Target sticker on their back. That is how systematically healthcare has been targeted. And frankly, in the last 24 hours, what we've seen from Al Shifa Hospital, what we've seen from Al Aqsa Hospital, and what I worry is coming to the remaining hospitals of the Gaza Strip, because it has been the pattern and we will not ignore it, is a direct and systematic targeting of healthcare that is unjustifiable.
Yeah. So, I mean, she put it exactly correct there. I mean, what are we really talking about having conversations? Are we supposed to accept? I mean, you can go and look at the maps of Gaza before and after, right? I mean, how many residential buildings, entire apartment blocks that have been completely flattened to the ground? There's no way that anybody could possibly, with a straight face, after looking at the destruction in Gaza, and come away with the conclusion that this is a targeted operation. In what world is that a targeted operation? Unless your target is the entire population of Gaza. That's the only way that even feasibly makes sense. I mean, she also backs up the reporting on people being executed inside of the Al Shifa medical complex. And so what do we get from the White House? We'll hear from Karine Jean-Pierre, who apparently said that the U.S. government has not verified footage documenting the atrocities committed at Al Shifa, but she said it is deeply concerning if it's true. We are reaching out to Israel's government to get more information. So, translation, they're going to go behind the scenes and ask Israel, hey guys, did you commit war crimes? And Israel's going to say, nope, don't worry about it. And then they're going to come out and say, well, we don't believe that, Israel is in violation of international law, and we respect their right to self-defense. And by the way, we're going to continue shoveling them billions of dollars in weapons under the table. That's what we're going to get. Not that I'm some sort of fortune teller, but just going through this cycle over and over and over again as we see mass atrocity after mass atrocity. And, I've talked about different stories recently of the Biden administration escalating the weapons that we're sending to Israel, escalating the kinds of intelligence that we're giving to Israel to do some of these attacks and some of these strikes. The United States backed up their claims when they put out that bizarre, video claiming that it was a massive Hamas command and control center under Al Shifa that never materialized. The U.S. State Department was coming out and backing up those claims. Yeah, it's a Hamas command center. And then it just wasn't. And then we just all moved on. And I guess moved on so much so that they launch another raid and suddenly we're supposed to believe the same bullshit talking points again. I mean, that's what this is. It's just a never-ending cycle of just being gaslit into oblivion. I mean, this is why people have turned against the Biden administration. This is why people don't trust Israel. This is why people don't trust the United States government. It's because you can't just lie repeatedly against what all of the video evidence, all of the images, all of the testimony from people on the ground, every major human rights organization, the United Nations. You can't just spit in all of their faces and then spit in our faces and pretend as if our eyes are lying to us. Oh, everybody else is lying to us, except for the government of Israel and the government of the United States. They're the only ones who are telling us the truth, right? That's what we're expected to believe. And so the Biden administration continues to illegally ship them weapons, continues to give them diplomatic cover. And in the meantime, they're gearing up not only for more attacks on hospitals, but also for an invasion of Rafah, which is just going to worsen this horrific humanitarian, catastrophe that's unfolding right now. And so, we'll have to stay on top of it. I'm going to have a bunch more Israel stories because that's all I could fit into this video. But, it really is just, I don't even know what to say at this point anymore, guys. There's really not much more that you can add to the conversation other than just showing what Israel is doing, showing them bald-faced lying about it, and then showing the United States gobbling up those lies and regurgitating them back out to the American people to continue to justify being fully complicit in what is obviously a genocide.